So I'm Jeff Berlin, and me and my friend Dennis Biela are going to talk about, we're both avid pilots, first and foremost, I would say.
Yeah.
And Dennis has actually even built an airplane, which is really cool to somebody like me, because that's awesome. But I've been flying for over 20 years. How long have you been flying?
Longer than that.
Okay, so we're not going to get into dates and ages and stuff like that, but needless to say, our passions for aviation run deep. And I could actually stand out here and talk airplanes all day, and that's totally fine. So here we are, we're back up. So we're going to talk about actually the combination of two passions, really, which is aviation and photography. So I have a teaser now that I'm going to play where I took some aviation video, and this kind of is everything that I love. So it's just, they're going to switch it over real quick. So this to me is what aviation is all about. It's about just the freedom. And there's audio to this.
This is Apollo Control.
How's that audio?
For 2 hours into the flight of Apollo.
People couldn't always see that before. And he started rolling it, and they go, wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, we hear him talking.
And
This
it
is
got
4K.
slower and slower, and it kind of
action
goes
cam.
into a hover. And he's still rolling. They never seen that.
And there's music
and
playing.
then he popped in the clutch and went in reverse. And lo and behold!
Yeah, and what's really cool in this video is we have it hooked up to the airplane's intercom, and we can hear him talking about what he's doing. And then, here, this is another pilot friend of mine, Mike Bullion. And these are some of the top airshow pilots in the world that Dennis also, knows these guys. And, it's all about getting access to, and we'll discuss that. How do you get your cameras onto these airplanes? So that's a little bit of video teaser. And so just to kind of go into detail real quick, that's how I had that camera mounted on the airplane. And you notice I have a big piece of tape on there because these cameras are subject to, and Dennis will corroborate this, these cameras are subject to a lot of aerodynamic loads and G loads, G forces, and the wind, 200 knot winds. So, that's a lot of force. I wanted to make sure that the settings were, nothing was going to change, nothing was going to move. And so for that video that I just showed you, this is how I did it, some of it. But really, my background in aviation has been as a pilot and as the editor of these magazines. So these are all the magazines that I was the editor of. So my background, I actually quit photography to do airplane stuff. So it was a little bit after 9/11, it's a whole story, but I was like, you know what? I love to fly. I'm going to do that now with my life. So I started contributing to magazines as a writer and photographer. And then I ended up, this magazine called Plane and Pilot, which is available on newsstands nationwide as the #2 consumer aviation magazine. I ended up getting hired there as their editor. So for a year and a half, I was the decider. I was the one who, that was one of my first covers with Plane and Pilot. And I changed the color, and I was choosing what was going into the magazine every month as editor. And then after Plane and Pilot, I started missing photography, and I jumped over to Pilot Mag, which was 6 times a year, and I ran that for about 3 to 4 years. And so, and I got to shoot, I was able to combine my passions where I love photographing people, so I did a portrait of Kurt Russell with an airplane. So it was really fun. And the kind of stories that I would write for the magazines. So actually, here's me getting ready to go fly an F-16 fighter jet. And I got to write about it in the story I wrote, Bitten by the Viper, which is the code name that they call the F-16. So that was really fun, and that's probably my coolest selfie that I've ever done. So, I'm not much of a selfie person, but that's a pretty badass selfie if you ask me. So, the other kind of stories I would do, I would go out and test fly an airplane like they do with the car magazines. Oh, the 2015 Cadillac, it drives like this, it goes this fast, it corners, blah, blah, blah. I would do the same thing with really cool airplanes like the Piaggio Avanti, or I took a Cirrus SR-22, and I flew this airplane, just like it, from Minnesota to Brazil. It took 4 days. I went out and flew an airplane called the Piper Meridian, and I took it to the Bay Area, to Napa, and we went to wineries for a day, and I flew that. And again, this is just, again, you know, for one of my magazines, I did a story about Kenny G, and so I did the portraits for that. So I was always, and this is actually, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. Hinton, Steve Hinton. And he's Reno race champion for, I don't know, a few years.
Yeah.
And you know, I caught him at an air show, and I just did his portrait. So I'm always combining my love for aviation, my love for photography, my love for photographing people, and you know, going out and doing, you know, airplane stuff. I shot for the calendar for the P-51 Mustang, this specific red tail, and you know, that's the kind of stuff that I've been doing. And I just wanted to show this really quick. I did this past summer at the air show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, and this is how I shot it. And it's the tail, it's the tail end of the engine pod for the B-52 bomber. You know, there's so 2 engines, the 8 engines. But you can see here, back and forth, whoops, the dynamic range and the detail that these cameras capture. I might like it to look like that, but if I go into the file, I'm seeing fan blades and detail in that engine inlet, or in the, you know, where the engine exhaust comes out. That's pretty cool to me, that I'm really, even though I prefer it like that, I think it's more artistic, that I have that detail, you know, for the other photography that I do, you know, that's just a great, and so here's Dennis. I'm going to give Dennis the clicker.
Thank you.
But that's me, essentially.
So I'm also a pilot. Can you hear me? Is it working?
Oh yeah, we hear you.
Okay, good. So I'm a pilot. I built a thing called the Christian Eagle. It's a little stunt biplane, because my flight instructor told me I could never keep it straight and level, so I can fly upside down and such. I'm also, when I go to what they call air-to-airs, basically we have a twin-engine plane with the doors off, the cargo doors off, and I'm hanging out the side. So I'm trying to shoot as the pilot or the planes are flying along with me. I'm also published. I have some covers. I'm in some different magazines, double trucks. I do a lot of different varying aviation type photography. So not only flying alongside, but also at air shows, and I do feature stories as well. So my main gig is I'm a photographer at the Smithsonian, the National Air and Space Museum. I get to photograph the interiors of all the aircraft. So I'm very blessed with my work, because the SR-71, there's not many people who can say they've been inside an SR-71, or a B-29. I've been in the Enola Gay. Usually it's, the only restrictions for me is girth. You know, I have to fit through those portals. So, oops, wrong way. I'm also a specialist in like remote photography. So I do a lot of things we'll talk about where I mount cameras on different extensions of the plane. Now, and I get a lot of people who ask me questions on this particular feature, because you can translate it to other things. You know, we've all wanted to mount the camera to a car someplace and get it while it's going down the streets of New York, that type of thing. So the same principles I applied to the airplane also apply to the car. The Goodyear blimp, it's the latest thing, the Zeppelin, as it was flying over Oshkosh. I was privileged enough to be inside and shoot the interior as we were flying over the airport. The Blue Angels, I'm doing some stuff with the Blue Angels currently, and also Sean Tucker is a client of mine, so we managed to get all the things together. And somebody asked me earlier today, what was the most exciting thing or the most interesting thing? I said, you know what, when you open up those doors and you look outside and you see F-18s flying alongside of you, it's pretty cool. So I'm very fortunate about that.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's a really cool perspective when you have, you know, you're leaning out into a 150 knot slipstream, and there's an airplane right there, and you can almost touch it. It's kind of an extraordinary thing. You hear the engine, you hear, I mean, it's amazing the proximity, how that it kind of reverberates in your bones. It's really cool.
So I also do space launches. So I started with the space shuttle, covering that for the last 3 years for the Smithsonian. all the various launches and the things that go around. I do current launches as well, but to me it's a tube. You know, right side, left side, it's still a tube. So I love doing it, but it's not quite as exciting as when the shuttles would take off. So Orion, I photographed that, and then also I followed the shuttle when it went to the Endeavour when it went to California. So I was on the streets of California with a vest running around trying to get interesting pictures.
That was amazing how they maneuvered that through the streets of Los Angeles, like literally taking things apart as it would go by and putting it back together. And like they almost dismantled half of LA to get that thing.
And they cut down like 400 trees and had to replant like 500 trees, something like that. So Jeff and I are going to talk to you a little bit about cameras and the different cameras we use. And I always get asked, which is my favorite camera? At which point I say yes. Because almost all cameras that Sony makes, I'm using in one form or another. And you're going to see some pretty cool images coming up. So we'll move on.
So for example, when you're doing a picture like this, here, give me what was happening here. Like for example, just give me a little behind the scenes. What camera are you using? What's going on communication-wise? Because air-to-air photography, let's just talk about what that entails, because you can't just take off and meet up and expect to get good pictures. You don't want to get, normally as a pilot, you don't want to get close to other airplanes. So let's talk a little bit about how these shoots come together.
So this particular shoot on the right with Sean Tucker and the Cessna Jet, we have a regular procedure where we do a pre-flight. So the photographer, myself, the pilots, we get together and we talk about frequencies, what the radio frequencies will be that we'll use. We'll actually have a map so we can draw out the route so we know exactly where we'll be. Because I usually like to shoot late in the day for low sun, just like, you know, a landscape guy, I want to get that low, sweet sun. And then we'll either have a safety pilot or the pilot of the photo ship is actually like the chief pilot. He calls the shots. When I talk to Sean, I don't talk to Sean. I don't jump and say, hey, would you go up 10 feet, down 10 feet? What I do is I talk to the pilot flying the photo ship. He relays that to Sean. The reason for that is it's called situation awareness. When you're taking pictures, you know how it is. You're so focused on that picture that you forget all the world around you. And when the pilot is watching you take pictures of him, he's concentrated on you, right? When he really has to also pay attention to the surroundings.
So let me interject. Let me ask you this then. Also, do you ever, because I know in the situations that I've done air to air, I'm also going like this or like this or like this, you know, back. I'm using some hand signals too sometimes
Well, I still talk to the pilot and have him relay it, because then he can tell, besides telling Sean, he knows what's going on. If Sean starts to drift up or gets too close, I need to tell the pilot he's too close so he knows, you know, he should be paying attention a little bit.
And there are always procedures for if you lose each other.
Right.
There are always procedures to make sure that you don't turn into each other if you lose sight of each other.
So, so an average flight might be an hour, 45 minutes, and we'll be in constant communication. The photo ship pilot will be talking to the other pilot. We'll actually have a procedure to break. You know, when I tell the photo ship pilot, it's usually Brian, you know, we're done, then Brian will say break, and then usually Sean or the other person there will turn left and we will turn right, just to be sure that we're not like heading into each other. So I'm going to move forward.
Well, and so what I'd like to really talk about and get into this also beyond that, so because I mean your life is literally on the line. I mean there's some, you know, somebody once said about aviation that it couldn't happen unless you're at a lethal speed and a lethal altitude, and I thought that was a really interesting way to describe aviation. You know, it is inherently hazardous. The margins are limited. And so, this is definitely pushing the margins of safety. That's why you want the best formation pilots and, the best crews and the best pre-flight briefings. But let's talk about the stuff that we think about, which is shutter speeds and how are you setting your ISO? How are you setting your, your degrees Kelvin or your, your white balance? Tell me about what you're thinking camera-wise.
So, my average camera is the new A7R Mark II. I love that camera. We'll get a little bit into why I'm using that camera. The pilots usually are flying really close together. There's a joke where Sean Tucker flew so close to the Golden Knights that one of the Golden Knights guys took his patch and laid it right on his wingtip. So, and we have a lot of difference in speed, so we have to be cognizant that jet is flying at its minimum speed at about 140 knots, and Sean is probably not at his maximum speed, but he's around 160 knots. So we have a lot of coordination to go. One of the things I love about the EVA, the electronic viewfinder, is that no matter how many neutral density filters I start adding on, my viewfinder is still bright. I can still focus. When I use the optical viewfinders, I always had issues with neutral density filters. And the reason why we're talking about that is I usually use a 24-70. That's my standard lens, nothing special as far as that goes. I will use like a 2-stop back neutral density filter to hold the light down. And the reason for that is, if you see the spinning prop, we want the props to spin. Nothing looks odder than to see a plane and the prop is perfectly still.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a model airplane up there. It doesn't look real. So, it's just really photogenic and beautiful when you have that disc.
So I'm shooting at 60th of a second there.
So how does stabilization work with you for that? Now that these cameras have internal stabilization at a 60th, you could be in turbulence or bumping around a little bit. There's vibration. How does that help?
Yeah, Sony has an internal image stabilization on the sensor. I think it's a little bit nicer than some of the optical stabilizers. So that
because I was going to say, one of the things that aviation photographers have used in the past is those big external things that you bolt on the bottom of the camera.
Yeah,
gyro stabilizer.
Yeah, gyro stabilizer. It's like a little ball. Looks like a big sausage, and it spins inside a gyro spinning to help keep the camera stable. Well, that thing adds another 3 to 5 pounds in weight easily. Yep. And now you start adding a long lens and stuff. It adds up. So having the new stabilized cameras works out really well. Also, I'll actually get close enough to use a 16 to 35 or the 70 to 200. So 70 to 200 is...
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention about also the weight of the camera is sometimes we'll crank into some tight turns and you start pulling a couple G's,
right.
So that camera will become twice as heavy because you're pulling, in a 60-degree bank, you're pulling 2 G's.
Means that the camera's going to weigh twice as much.
So without that big thing bolted on the bottom, you're saving 10 pounds, 12 pounds at the end of the day.
Yeah. So, and the other nice thing is that the R7R Mark II takes gorgeous pictures at 50 ISO. Some of the cameras, they'll smear, the image sensor isn't quite as clean or it might add noise, but at 50 ISO on the R, it's beautiful. So I shoot a lot at 50 ISO, a 2-stop back, neutral density filter. Now, the other reason why I'm using a neutral density filter is that if I didn't, I'd have to stop down to f16. The two things I don't like about f16 is that everything's in focus, usually, and I don't want that. I want to try to have a softer background. And 2, I'm not at the optimum quality of that lens. It's got diffraction setting in. So having f8, f5.6 is a much sweeter spot for the lens. And you know what? If we go underneath the cloud, I just crank up the ISO. The ISO is so clean, that could easily go to 400 and not even have to worry about it.
You could really, with these cameras you could go to 16, 3200 even, and it's still very clean. We have about 5 minutes.
Okay, so I'll start moving.
Yeah.
Some shots of
Matt
Chapman for his website and their brochure and his new Extra 330. I'm hanging out a modified 172 RG with the door off, taking these shots. We were in Chicago, so you can see a shot. These are all with the 24 to 70. I'm going to move forward a little bit, Sean. Sean loves doing air-to-airs of aerobats. Think of trying to, photograph a fly, while you're flying. It gets a little intense trying to keep up with him in his different positions and stuff. Out in California, I shoot a lot over water if I can. Very clean backgrounds. Gives more focus to the object.
I mean, and look at the color in that. It's just so vibrant and beautiful against the dark, the blue of it. It's just lovely, so I love it.
Jets. I love shooting jets mostly because I don't have to slow down the shutter. I can shoot at 2/50th of a second and not have to worry about
no propeller to worry about.
Yeah. So this is one of the photo ships we use a lot, so I'm usually strapped in up here so I can shoot aft. So twin engines, we can do up to 200 miles an hour, so we have a pretty good range of things we can shoot, and we're harnessed in. The seatbelt that you see there, that's just for effect. We wear it when we take off because it's the law, and then we take it off when we're actually shooting.
So one thing I want to add, this is, a Piper, Seneca. There are some other airplanes, including like some old warbirds that some photographers use. Like, have you ever seen ads of jets or photos of jets flying right at the camera? That's where there's a photographer sitting in the tail gunner section of an old warbird shooting just straight back. So there's a lot of, depending on the type of airplane you're flying, photoshop-wise, it'll also dictate what kind of shots you get.
So one of the things I really enjoy about the new 7R Mark II is the larger file size. I'm old school. I like to crop. I like to get in really close and have the image set. But when I shot this, I normally have two cameras. I have a 24-70 on one camera and a 70-200 on the other. And the reason for that is I'm in the middle of the sky flying at 200 miles an hour with wind whipping all over. Anytime you take that lens off, that means instant dust. You're right on the sensor. So I shot this, but I knew they wanted a close-up, and I didn't have time to switch cameras, so I just cropped in. The nice thing about the larger files are that you can crop in and still have excellent photos. This is Sean with the news anchor for CBS News in Chicago. He took her up for a demo ride. And you can see how close Sean is like right up against the lip of the plane as we're flying along. So camera remotes. This is where I'm placing cameras in different positions and stuff. Do we have a minute or two?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. So this is, they actually made this into a billboard. And I get a lot, I could just use my GoPro. Well, yeah, you could, but the quality won't be there. So I'm using cameras this size that I'm mounting on the plane.
So I should point out too, that's a Ford tri-motor, which already is really, there's not many of them flying. So, these are really unique airplanes that Dennis is also getting access to mount these things on.
So again, I have a A6000 mounted between the wings looking aft. The image on the right side was the poster for last year's air show. So, and I asked them, why did they pick that picture? And I figured they were going to give me all these technical reasons, propping and stuff. He's smiling. That's why that picture got selected, because he's actually smiling in the shot. So safety is always a big thing. When we're mounting a camera on a plane, we're always thinking about safety. This would hit about 150 miles an hour. It'd be a real projectile if it fell off. FAA gets a little annoyed by that. So on this particular one, I have a Bogan super clamp, and the camera's mounted on a stud. But if you look closely, I've got a ton of zip ties going all over it, so I can hold it in place. The big thing to remember is vibration. The plane is always vibrating, and like you've seen those screws back out, we can't have that. So we're trying to tie the camera to the plane, so if something did happen, the most it can go is a few inches.
So let's talk very quickly about, because we have limited time, let's talk about how you set these cameras, because you're not there to operate them.
So I hardwired these cameras. I basically take the connector, what's called the multimedia connector, and I cut them up. I'll buy them out of cheap ones. I'll cut them up, and then I'll short them out, and then I'll put the connector back into the camera when I'm ready to shoot. I'll use a slow, meaning cheap, SD card. And if I use a slow SD card with the way I have it shorted out, it takes 1 frame per second So when he takes off, I'll flip on the camera, he'll start shooting. When he comes back, it'll be, maybe 10, 15 minutes later, I'll have 3,000 to 5,000 pictures. If I can't find a good picture out of 5,000 pictures, I shouldn't be doing this. I'm gonna, right here, I wanna see if I can get it back. Oh, another one. So this is Aeroshell, one of my shots. I have a camera mounted to the tail. I have a camera mounted to the wing on this one. Right here, if you look, see that little black dot? There's a little right behind, there's an antenna right there. That's this camera going for a ride on the tail of that airplane. So he's doing on average 120 to 160, 70 miles per hour, and that little camera works great. So I used to have larger DSLRs. I could never mount the DSLRs in these
And what
positions.
lenses do you have on there?
The camera that's forward on that tail is a fisheye, so I would get a big expanse so I could see all the wings. There's another camera mounted to the plane on the belly looking aft. Same type of thing, taking
And then do you have the camera just on auto? I mean,
yeah, it's on auto, aperture priority, 400 ISO aperture priority, and then
and what aperture do you like?
usually like f8.
So for some good depth of field.
Yeah, correct. So we'll have a lot of things in focus when we're zooming around.
And these guys, I should say, these guys are a loud act. And these are old T6 Texan airplanes, a lot of vibration. It's fun to watch. These are really cool images to me, as an airplane geek.
Yeah, and they do a night show now. So a big thing is to mount the cameras and have them far away when they're working at night. Another tail shot looking forward. Here's that wing shot, and that bracket right there is this bracket right here with the little camera. So you'll see a set of screws. There's what they call fiber nuts underneath, so I can actually tighten down this so it wouldn't fall off.
Okay.
And then I have zip ties again, and we're down to 2 minutes, 1 minute. So also action cams. They actually have commercially made attachments. This is called N-Flight. It's about $79 online. You can buy them. And most aircraft use 1/8-inch screws in the sheet metal, and that'll replace it. It leaves a stud that you can attach to. And the cool thing about this, we never talked about, is that this has a legal waiver with the FAA. So I can mount this on commercial aircraft and still be within a flight spec. We haven't even talked about like how the FAA
That's
is.
very technical, but you can't, with factory manufactured airplanes, you can't make modifications without a sign off from an A&E, and it's a whole thing. So this is a way to get around that. That's a fabulous solution.
So, and for my friends in the room who are rocket geeks, all two of you, a SpaceX launch, we do a lot of remotes with SpaceX or with rocket launches. Again, we're mounting cameras outdoors. We have covers for them, so they'll be protected, because the cameras have to actually go out a couple of days ahead of time. So there's timers to turn the camera on like 5 minutes before the launch, and then a microphone senses when the blast hits, and then it starts firing the camera. And the reason why we do it in that sequence, because if you just use the microphone and a bird lands on top of your camera, it'll just set the thing off. And I've had times where I've had like 500 to 1,000 shots of, well, the rocket's still there. What happened? That type of thing. So I think we're out of time. We are out of time.
So if anybody has any last minute questions, we're going to just be right over here on the side hanging out. And thanks for hanging with us and watching.